Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bob Fu Report. As my team at China Aid, we're preparing to attend and organize some events during the second International Religious Freedom Summit in Washington, D.C. I heard a shocking news. It was about a Taiwan democracy activist who has been a friend to me and my wife, with him and his wife, Mr. Ming-che. His wife is Li Ching-yu. So Mr. Li, he usually led debates on China-Taiwan relations and give online lectures about the Taiwan experience on how Taiwan successfully transitioned from military dictatorship back to General Chiang Kai-shek's time to a democracy, a full-blown democracy with protected freedom and rule of law. So we had invited him and his wife to speak at the the International Religious Freedom Summit this year. And just really on the eve of his boarding time into his flights in Taipei, he received news from CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States. You would be wondering, why CDC involved this? Well, it's still the pandemic time. Everything has to do with the Communist Party virus. Certainly, CDC in the past 3 years has almost this nearly almighty and challenging power, and especially for those who are traveling from overseas. So CDC basically at the last minute denied Mr. Li's entrance to the United States. As we all know, Mr. Li was kidnapped by the Chinese Communist Party in 2017 in Macau on his way to a China bordering city called Zhuhai. And then later on, he was declared enforced disappearance, basically under the Communist Party's notorious residential surveillance at a designated location. Now it's known as RSDL. And later on, as a Taiwanese citizen, he was charged by the Chinese Communist Party with the subversion of state power and imprisoned for 5 years. Of course, he was jailed in the Hunan Chishan prison and being forced to labor 15 hours a day. And during his imprisonment time, China Aid, we invited his wife, Miss Li Ching-yu, to Washington, D.C., to Brussels, to Netherlands, to London, to Berlin, basically provide her a voice to call for her husband's freedom. In U.S. Congress, in different parliaments in Europe, and she had spoken up. And the one of the co-chairs of the International Religious Freedom Summit, the former U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom under President Trump, who was, of course, the former senator and former governor of Kansas, went to Taiwan, even met with Mr. Li's wife, Li Qingyu, at the U.S. de facto embassy and held a press conference, stood in absolute solidarity with this couple. So all these factors, I remember another little detail. It must be in 2019 or 18 that when we invited Ms. Li Qingyu to Washington, D.C., it happened to be during the State of the Union time. I still remembered it was like the day before the State of the Union about to happen. I received a text message from the Chief of Staff of Congressman Chris Smith, and who really worked very hard for Mr. Li Ming-che's freedom. The next day, as a guest of Congressman Chris Smith, Miss Li was seated at the gallery in Capitol Hill while President Trump delivered his State of the Union address. So all these factors combined, of course, many of us had been praying for him and for the family. And Mr. Li Ming-che was released in April 2022, finally. And this led to us for the invitation for him to come to the U.S., also travel to Texas. We planned for and book his flights, and he got his visa thanks to the State Department. Basically within one day, he was interviewed and granted a visa, a special visa to come to the United States, because he was indicted, convicted, and sentenced by the Chinese Communist Party's political kangaroo court for subversion of state power as a prisoner of conscience. And the U.S. Embassy in Taiwan basically found out, Mr. Li had already received 3 doses of the Chinese made COVID vaccine in his prison. The vaccine's name is called Anhui Zhifei vaccine. And unfortunately, his vaccine is not listed on the so-called CDC's accepted vaccines for overseas travelers, non-American citizens. And the U.S. diplomats assured Mr. Li would be able to enter the country, and they basically felt the CDC would have no problem to make exemption under CDC's regulations. And one of the regulations, basically, it says, if you already had been fully vaccinated, basically even though if it's not accepted or not on the list of CDC, the CDC should be able to give an exemption if your health, like a condition, would not allow you to receive additional so-called accepted vaccines. And Mr. Li had heart disease. I mean, look at this. This is basically something, a certificate and a proof by the Taiwan's top hospital at the capital city. Examined him. Is called the Taiwan Veteran General Hospital. It's like in Washington D.C. we have a Walter Reed Hospital, so that's the equivalent of the hospital. After examining him, basically said Mr. Ming-che has hypertensive heart disease with the congestive heart failure, which was diagnosed and is having medical treatment by Taipei Veteran General Hospital. And the medical proof from Mr. Li's the prison, basically where the prison is called Hunan Provincial Center for Disease Control and Prevention, clearly shows that Mr. Li Ming-che had already taken 3 COVID-19 vaccines in 2021 on May 15th, June 12th, and July 12th during his imprisonment in China. And this is the conclusion by the medical scientific communities in Taiwan. The conclusion is, I read the quote, "It is medically unethical, unhealthy, and inadvisable to ask Mr. Li Ming-che to have any more shot of COVID-19 vaccine." End the quote. Basically signed by MD Dr. Chao Junshi, and with the stamp from the hospital. So apparently the CDC uses dictatorial authoritative power, denied this exemption request, actually submitted by the Taiwan, the U.S. embassy, de facto embassy in Taiwan, officially. According to portion of the CDC posted document, it said accordingly, CDC has determined that for an individual to meet the exception, a licensed physician must have determined that the individual has a medical contraindication to an accepted COVID-19 vaccine. And so the CDC intends for this exception to be applied in strict accordance with scientific evidence, and has provided additional details of concerning exception. Basically, we studied that exception, and there are 8 or 9 exceptions. Basically, the top few are like head of state, diplomats, etc., as if this head of state or diplomats are less susceptible to the COVID-19 than the ordinary citizens. And that's number one. Number two, the number 4 conditions for exception is exactly like what Mr. Li Lee's condition. It's medically unfit, basically, unhealthy. I mean, he has a hypertensive heart disease with congestive heart failure. We already knew what COVID, have caused, and he already taken 3 doses of vaccine. And the medical community basically showed the proof that he cannot and is not able and medically unethical, and inadvisable and unhealthy to force him to take further vaccines. Very sad. I mean, Mr. Lee intends to come over to the United States as a prisoner of conscience, try to share his story in his prison, and with a grateful heart of all those who advocate for him. We already scheduled a press conference, scheduled meetings with the ambassador Sam Brownback, Congressman Chris Smith, Congressman Frank Wolf, and State Department officials, the member from the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and certainly one trip into our great state of Texas to spend some time with ours. And so it's according to Mr. Lee, it's a trip of gratitude. I mean, he basically wants to thank everyone who helped for his freedom, and also he wants to encourage those, the policymakers, the legislators, the NGO leaders on China who had been hugely discouraged in the past few years because of this increasingly cultural revolution like leadership of this dictator Xi Jinping. It seems none of the advocacy had been working, but Mr. Lee personally testified from all these details from his prison that every time, be it a meeting with his wife in Washington, D.C., be a congressional hearing of his wife, be a press release, be another, a meeting at the European Parliament, and a member of the British Parliament kind of spoke for her and for her husband. Every little detail about this, and they compare the notes, the timing, it always resulted in improving his conditions in his prison. And his prison conditions has always become better. The Communist Party, well, they may not acknowledge that in public, but Mr. Lee had experienced that. He wants to talk about these details. And he has a COVID-19 PCR test already multiple times, including before his departure, supposed departure. And yet, CDC still denied his exemption application submitted by the U.S. Embassy through the State Department. So this is a shocking but also very sad chapter. I think this and the CDC's denial letter only has like 2 sentences. Basically said, your application for exemption is denied. Bye-bye. I mean, that was the sentence, basically. No due process, no mechanism to make an appeal. That's it. It's almost like you live in a communist party of China, the CPC country, and the CDC's this kind of unchallenged power I think during the COVID, we all have experienced. Thank God we still have some court of providing the checks and balance on some of these horrible CDC decisions, such as this pathetic kind of mandate of masks for the airplane travelers, public transportation. But that's only for restriction for the Americans and those who come across from our Texas border. They are not required. So, I can name this double standard. So it's a very, crooked society, very deprived. I just want to encourage everyone, despite of all these setbacks, all these bad news, let's take heart in the Lord and be a shining star as we take comfort from His Word. This is from Philippians chapter 2, verse 15 to 16. Paul said, "You may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault, in a crooked and deprived generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe, and you hold out the word of life." The word of life. So hold out the word of life and be the shine stars in the universe. May God continue to bless you.
Thank you, Bob, for that report. As Bob mentioned, we're very sad and disappointed that Ming-che was not able to join us this year for the International Religious Freedom Summit. Hopefully with some public outcry and some eyes and ears on this case, we can get some changes to CDC policy in the future. The International Religious Freedom Summit, though, is a great event, and although Ming-che is not able to join us, you can join us in person or live. You can find tickets to the IRF Summit online, or you can join us on our social media pages, where we will be hosting 3 separate events on Facebook Live. Now, the Earth Summit is a great opportunity for countless NGOs and nonprofits to gather and share information in their areas of focus. Of course, at China Aid, we're very much committed to religious freedom in China, and we're concerned about the violations there. But some of our other partners have some interesting focuses as well. The Presbyterian Church of Taiwan is also a partner with China Aid, and we'll be hosting a side event with them focused on how Taiwan is going to be the future of international religious freedom because of its position on the geopolitical stage right now. We're also very interested to be helping host an event with AG Immigration Group, which is a group that helps refugees of persecution, religious persecution, get to a new country like the United States. We'll be having a testimony at that event from Ximing, also known as Hope, who's the wife of the imprisoned human rights lawyer Chen Yuan in China. She's going to be sharing her testimony about persecution, and you're going to be learning the ins and outs of international law and asylum and how that works with religious persecution. At China Aid's event, we're going to be discussing how Xi's imperialistic, his digital tyranny is really suppressing a lot of the efforts, and it's also causing a lot of people to get put in these concentration camps. Oval Beck, also known as Joseph, will be there. And some of the other featured speakers on the main stage include Miro, or Ren Ruting, who's a survivor from the Early Rain Covenant Church. She's going to be sharing her testimony, and Inez Cantor, the ex-NBA player, will also be there talking about Uyghurs as well. We hope that you can join us in person. You can purchase tickets at irf.com, or you can join us on our China Aid Facebook page, where we'll be hosting several of these events on Facebook Live. Well, that concludes it for the Bob Fu Report today. Hope you have a blessed day.